Hello and welcome to Frankly Speaking, and joining me tonight is the Chief Economic Advisor to the Finance Minister, Mr. Krishnamurthy Subramanian. Good evening, Mr. Subramanian, and thank you very much for joining me tonight. And it is that time of the year when we are all extremely focused on the Indian economy and the upcoming budget, which is just about 24 hours away from us. I've been looking at the economic survey that was presented to the Parliament yesterday, and I've seen the numbers that you've put in there. The last fiscal, we've seen growth contracting by about 7.7%, but according to your own estimates, the next fiscal, that's 21-22, April to March, we're expecting a growth of 11%. Do you think there is a fine print here? Because last year, whatever we said, went down the tube with the pandemic. Is this 11% that you're speaking about at this moment takes into account any impediments that might come in the way, given that the pandemic had still not left us? And of course, we have many other challenges, including elections in 5 states coming up.
So, Navika, we have covered this extensively in volume 1 in the first chapter of the economic survey, that India's policy response to this pandemic, both on the health side and on the economic side, has been very mature. India imposed a stringent lockdown initially, and something that was recommended by epidemiological and economic research, and India therefore benefited from that by saving lives, and also the V-shaped economic recovery has essentially stemmed from the same. After a 23.9% decline in Q1, the 7.5% in Q2 and Q3, which is expected to be marginally positive, and then more positive in Q4, going into 11%. I think that is a manifestation of the V-shaped recovery during the unlock phase, especially the measures that have been taken both on the supply and the demand side. India recognized very well that this pandemic is likely to have both demand and supply side effects. On the demand side, India took a different path by adopting a simple principle that if the brakes on the car are already clamped, then there is no point in pressing on the accelerator. That just wastes fuel. But once the brakes are removed, that's the time to press the accelerator. I'm talking about discretionary spending and distinguishing that from essential spending, which is what India focused on early on. So when you take all these into account, I am confident that the 11% growth rate that we've projected should be achievable. IMF incidentally has projected 11.5%. So we do think there is some upside potential as well in the coming year.
Mr. Subramanian, you spoke about 2 things. One is the V-shaped recovery. Many people, many economists are looking at this as a K-shaped recovery, and they're saying that there are several sectors that still haven't really responded. These are in the small and micro scale industries, and that is where the problem is, both in terms of impacting growth as well as employment and the demand side. How do you respond to those critics who are looking at your V-shaped recovery model and saying instead that it is actually a K-shaped recovery?
Firstly, Navika, I must mention that after the Q1 GDP print had come on 31st of August, we had mentioned that by looking at the high frequency indicators, the macroeconomic indicators, there was indeed a V-shaped recovery that was happening, and I must say a lot of people had their doubts about that, about the V-shaped recovery itself on the macroeconomic indicators. Then we are glad to note that that assessment of ours has indeed now manifested with the 23.5% followed by 7.5%, and the momentum that has been gathered since then. Now, in terms of your of the specific question, if you look at India's policy response, and the Honorable Prime Minister also mentioned this, that in the last year there have been at least three mini budgets that have been presented through the Atmanirbhar Bharat 1, Atmanirbhar Bharat 2 and Atmanirbhar Bharat 3. The reason I bring this up is each of these packages has looked at the sectors and the constituents of the economy that have been facing difficulties and has come up with an intervention to take care of that. The same will be continued into the future as well. Just to give you an example, Atmanirbhar Bharat 3, for instance, focused a lot on discretionary consumption and also on employment through the wage subsidy scheme that was given. So recognizing and taking into account the information as it is coming, India has calibrated its response, and we will continue to do so till we get out of the pandemic and hit back the pre-COVID growth path. The V-shaped recovery that we are seeing and the necessary steps for looking at other constituents will be continued.
Mr. Subramanian, you also spoke about the IMF projections that have come out. In the past, we've seen policymakers in India, especially the former Finance Minister, Mr. P. Chidambaram, challenging the growth rates that were projected for India by the IMF way back in 2013. Do you think you go along and you're covering yourself up with using IMF as the umbrella, or do you really think that India should not be playing as safe as you are at this point in time, and maybe like Mr. P. Chidambaram, are you tempted to challenge the IMF projection?
Navika, as you yourself mentioned, our own prediction is 11%, and we have made that prediction based on the measures that have been taken over the last 1 year, and as the first chapter in volume 1 of the economic survey covers extensively, the steps that have been taken have been driven by fundamental principles highlighted by research in epidemiology and in economics. Just to give you one example, for instance, Nobel Prize winning work by Lars Hansen and Tom Sargent, whom I had the good fortune of learning from at the University of Chicago, recommend in their 2001 research that when faced with enormous uncertainty, minimizing the worst case losses actually is what is recommended, which is what India actually did by focusing on lives, because faced with a pandemic, human life was actually the biggest potential loss. Similarly, we focused on essential spending on essentials during the months of uncertainty, because when there is uncertainty, again, economics teaches us that the precautionary motive to save really dissuades people from spending on discretionary items, and so India did not waste its precious fiscal space at that time, but focused on essentials. By far, possibly the largest free food program of 800 million people, the cash transfers to the vulnerable sections, emergency credit to the MSMEs, liquidity support, forbearance, all of which was essential. So, and then once the unlock phase began, the emphasis on discretionary spending has been done. At the same time, a slew of structural reforms, and India is the only country to have done this, because we recognized that the supply side impact needs to be minimized as well. And that's why this response has been brought in. And I would like to contrast with the response during the global financial crisis, where the supply side measures, there were no measures that were taken, which led to the inflation subsequently, because when you have an increase in demand without a supply side response, you of course do get inflation. So given that contrast and given the fundamental economic principles that we have complied by, I am confidently actually saying the 11% growth rate. And ours is actually based on our own assessment, based on foundational economic principles.
Well, Mr. Subramaniam, I hope the former Finance Minister, Mr. P. Chidambaram, is listening to you, because even though you are refraining yourself from using any political analogies, the fact of the matter is a lot of economics is about a lot of politics that goes on in the background. And it is in this context that I ask you that your economic survey tabled yesterday relies very heavily on structural reforms in the agriculture sector. Given the fact that that over the last few years, we've seen the private sector, the medium and small scale sectors not responding as well and as fast to the incentives that have given, the investments really not rising at the pace that you would want them to raise, and therefore growth being below the potential level that we want it to be. The fact of the matter is that agriculture is the area where we could have taken these reform measures and pushed it forward, over the next 2 or 3 years. But that is mired in huge political logjam. Now, given this logjam and given what we saw in terms of confrontation between the government at the center and the political parties in the opposition, and of course the scenes that this country has witnessed on Republic Day, are you still positive? Are you still hopeful that these agricultural reforms will go forward in the next couple of years to be able to give you the dividends that you would want on the growth front?
Firstly, Navika, I think you've raised an important point. Here I would want to highlight that, given the political economy that is inevitable in a democracy, what this economic survey has highlighted is that India's economic policy making and the health policy making actually was mature enough to take bold steps, to take some short-term pain for long-term gain. Oftentimes, political economy considerations lead to exactly the opposite, where short-term gains are actually are taken for long-term pain. In contrast, the mature policy response demonstrates that the government has been willing to take the short-term pain for the long-term gain. So that's point number one. The second important point is, if you look at the other reforms, all of which combine to really enable productivity in the manufacturing sector. I particularly refer to the labor reforms which were pending for almost 3 decades. If you recall, in 1991, the loan that IMF had given, one of the conditionalities was labor reforms, and those have been done. Similarly, if you take into account the MSME definitions which enable MSMEs to grow, exploit economies of scale and thereby become productive, the export PLI scheme, the improvement in the ease of doing business, significant improvement there from when we were languishing in the 120s or so in 2014 to now being in the 60s. All of these really enable the manufacturing sector to grow at a time when there is a significant opportunity. And that is something that can really generate jobs in the economy, because the organized manufacturing sector has enormous potential to create jobs, which can push aggregate demand, significantly, and thereby, take India onto a high growth path. Specifically with respect to the agricultural reforms that you've asked, I do think that these reforms are indeed ones that will really help, in the especially the small and marginal farmer, because they provide the option to the small and marginal farmer. And this is just plain common sense that if I actually go and sell to someone, to a buyer, I do not have any options, then I am not likely to get enough, of a good price. But if I do have the option, then I actually have the chance to get a good price, which is also highlighted by Nobel Prize winning research by John Nash, for instance. So the economics of these agricultural reforms is compelling, and I think that is something that I would reiterate.
Mr. Subramaniam, I want to ask you a little bit of a personal question. I want to ask you, as an economic advisor to the finance minister and the government, do you find it frustrating at times when sound economic advice, which makes complete logical sense and can take the country and the economy and the growth to the next level, cannot be put into motion just because of some obstinate politics? Is it frustrating for you at times when you see this happening in the real world situation?
Not at all. I have always believed in the philosophy of the Bhagavad Gita, karmanye vadikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana ma karma phala hetur bhuhu mate sangotsva karmani. I actually do my duty, and I try my very best to persuade, on the importance of that. results are not in my hands.
Mr. Subramaniam, I also want to ask you that even before the pandemic and the lockdown impacted the economy in a crippling kind of way, we were going through a huge slowdown, recession, if you can call it that, and you know, the blues were all over the economy to see. Despite that, when the economy is bouncing back, we're seeing the economy sputtering, starting, but on the other hand, we see the stock markets, which seem to be in a world of their own, scaling new heights virtually every other day. If you discount the last 3 or 4 days of market corrections, the markets even crossed the 50,000 mark. Do you see these two as disconnected, or do you think the market really is being driven by something which is certainly not sound economics and sound growth in the economic sectors in India?
Firstly, Navika, I think we have to keep in mind that stock markets value future growth. You know, if you take an individual stock, the stock price is a combination of the value of the existing assets and the present value of future growth opportunities. The same thing is true for the aggregate market as well. Now, keep in mind that given the mature way in which India has implemented its policy and the fact that India will be among the highest growth economies in the world over the coming decade, the potential growth opportunity is enormous. And among large economies, India is possibly among the very few, select few that can promise growth of that kind. So investments always basically put their money where their mouth is, and so some of this is certainly coming in because of the promise of future growth. That said, I would also highlight that there is a lot of global liquidity because of the easy fiscal and monetary policies that are being pursued by the advanced economies, and these may not actually persist beyond FY24. That is my estimation, at which point in time correction in the liquidity may actually have some impact, but I think at least in the short run for now, that liquidity is searching for return, and India is offering that return. So you see that not only in the stock markets but also in the FDI that has come in record terms. Again, money basically being put where the mouth is. So these are essentially factoring in the future growth that India offers in an unparalleled manner.
Mr. Subramaniam, I also want to ask you about an observation that has been made by an Oxfam report, which says that in the worst possible lockdown and economic conditions, India's billionaires have gained wealth which is over 35%. And that has increased inequalities. Do you subscribe to that opinion, and do you think that just playing the stock market possibly is increasing the incomes and the net worths of billionaires in India when investment really hasn't been as forthcoming as profits in the stock market?
So Navika, on this, because this is a relevant issue, especially in the context of the pandemic, we've devoted an entire chapter in volume 1 of the economic survey, which is titled Inequality or Growth, Inequality and Growth, Conflict or Convergence. And this is motivated by some of the conflict that is being seen in the advanced economies between inequality and growth. Higher inequality in the advanced economies actually lowers socio-economic outcomes, while higher GDP per capita, which is an outcome of growth, actually betters socio-economic outcomes or sometimes does not have any impact at all. In contrast, in India, that particular conflict is not there at all, and that's something that is shown across several different indicators for socio-economic performance, that indeed there is a convergence between inequality and growth in the Indian context, and that is possibly reflecting the fact that we are at a different stage of development where our potential growth is much higher, and at the same time our opportunity to lift millions out of poverty is also significantly higher. So these are the realities that India must keep in mind. The other nuanced point, I think, which is also being made in that chapter, is that we have to distinguish between different forms of inequality. Economists look at inequality in consumption, because that is eventually what people look at. If your incomes are for instance different, you could borrow or save. People in different segments, income segments, save differently. So consumption inequality is what you look at, and income inequality is, or even asset inequality, are far removed from consumption inequality. So this is also a subtle aspect that must be kept in mind. When you look at all these measures of inequality in the Indian context, there is convergence, and therefore for now at least India must be continuing to focus on growth, so that the pie expands, which can be then used for redistributive policies as well to lift millions out of poverty. So in the Indian context at least, there is absolutely no conflict, and there is indeed convergence, and that is being shown through extensive research in this chapter.
I also want to ask you the fact that in the 50s and 60s we were a completely socialist economy, possibly leaning more towards the left. In the 2000s and especially in the second decade of the 2000s, we were looking at ideologies shifting towards the capitalist side. Do you think India has changed track once again ever since the Soot Boot Ki Sarkar Baab came in, and we've taken a turn towards once again the socialism policies of the 50s and 60s rather than a capitalist society, and virtually wealth creation has become a bad word in today's India, and these are pressures that are weighing on the politics of today?
No, I don't think so. If you recall, Navika, last year's economic survey had actually, the theme of that was ethical wealth creation. And we had in fact highlighted that those 50 years, about 40 odd years of socialistic policies were actually an ephemeral piece of history, because India historically, over millennia pursued a policy of ethical wealth creation, where wealth creation was commended. For instance, dharm, arth, kaba, moksha, in that earth is actually recommended as a noble pursuit. That is what we have inherited. And if you go and read disparate scriptures or literature like Arthashastra, Tirukural, from which we had quoted from, India indeed had actually followed a policy of enabling markets, free markets, together with enabling trust and actually ethical wealth creation. So that is the legacy that we have inherited. Yes, albeit we did actually depart from that for a short period of time. So the current policies that are being followed since 1991 in fact actually fit very well with our DNA, something that we've had for millennia. And even if you look at in the recent past, the kind of reforms that have been done, just to point out, the enterprise policy focused on private sector in a country where in the 1950s the first industrial policy had given the commanding heights of the economy to the public sector. Now, as part of the Atmanirbhar Bharat package, that commanding height of the economy has been given to the private sector. Government has basically said that except for some strategic areas, it has no business being in business. So if anything, over the last 6 years, and especially since the last couple of years, I think that the reform pace has speeded up, especially during this the last 1 year, and India is actually implementing the idea that ethical wealth creation is indeed a good thing, and which actually fits our own our own heritage as well.
Mr. Subramaniam, there is a lot of emphasis once again on the money that's going to come into capital formation or capital investments by the government in the next budget. Given the fact that 4.1 lakh crores was the estimate in the last budget, this time people are expecting more money to be put there. Of course, there will be some leftover because not much was put in the capital formation side from the public spending that was done last year. Most of the budgets have gone in for more of health infrastructure and health requirements of the country, and also the infrastructure pipeline that is being spoken about, which is about 111 lakh crores over a period of 3 years, that is being spoken about. Having these big capital investment kind of projects, is there that kind of money? I'm asking you in simple common man language, is there that kind of money that is going to be available to Finance Minister Ms. Nirmala Sitharaman when she gives out her budget just 24 hours from now?
Firstly, Navika, I must provide a correction here on the infrastructure spending. It's not right to say that infrastructure spending, capital expenditure spending has not happened. I'll just give you some numbers. In the month of October, on a month-on-month basis, the capital expenditure by the government increased 60%. In the month of November, on this higher base, when it had already increased 60%, the month of November it increased by about 160%. On this even higher base of November, in the December month, flash estimates from CGA show that the infrastructure spending by the capex spending by the government increased another 60%, and this is expected to continue into the remaining months of this year as well. And this has been done, as I was mentioning earlier as well, this calibrated response. Once the unlock began and the clamp was taken out on the brakes, that's when the accelerator has been pushed. So that correction is important for our viewers to understand that, if anything, subsidies have been reduced and capital expenditure has been enabled. So going forward in the next year as well, this will be, redoubled with a greater emphasis on the infrastructure, the national infrastructure pipeline. And here's where we've actually also, pointed out the need for fiscal spending, more spending by the government at a time like this when the economy actually has had a difficult time. And that's where we've talked about, if you borrow at, let's say, 6%, and you as in the government is borrowing at 6%, and the expected return, which is the GDP growth, is significantly higher than that. For instance, this year it's likely to be in excess of 15%. Then you are basically borrowing 100, you have to repay 106, but you get 115, and that means therefore that you are actually creating value in that process. So counter-cyclical fiscal policy, which is essentially saying that during bad times government should be doing more spending and should consolidate and take a step back when the times are good, is something that is recommended, and therefore borrowing for that for the infrastructure spending, and also enabling financing through infrastructure institutions, etc., is the way to go.
The kind of stress that people are going through over this weekend because the budget is on a Monday. As they say, tax rate increasing, the imminence of that is like the तीसरी आंख of Shivji, which people are waiting for. तो अगर आप कोई अच्छा शब्द कह दें तो शायद व्यूअर्स का वीकेंड बेटर हो जाएगा. Mr. Subramaniam, many people are talking about COVID says the requirement of large budgets for the government for all kind of expenditure. Most people, worry about this just 24 hours before the budget is finally announced. And today when we are speaking, it is the time when possibly in the basement of North Block, the budget must have gone to print and the finance minister must be giving the finishing touches to her speech that she will read out in Parliament. At such a time, the first question many people look at is not just the large outlays which gives the economic direction and the policy that the government is taking, but also how much you're going to squeeze the same number of taxpayers to meet your excess requirement for funds, which clearly will be something that you will have pressure about in the year of 21-22. How much of this will come in from tax rates which will need to be revised, especially with conversation of a COVID cess already making the rounds in the public domain?
So firstly, Navika, given that the projected growth this year is expected to be in nominal terms in excess of 15%, and if you even take a small tax buoyancy, which is for every 1 rupee increase, 1% increase in the growth, what is the increase in tax revenues? I think an increase of tax revenues of the order of 70% is something that is not unthinkable. Actually, is definitely possible. Together with the some of the non-tax revenue from the privatization, some of which actually will get done in the coming year. I think there is scope for doing the necessary spending. At the same time, I will also mention that the special category bonds that were announced in the last budget, which can enable the inclusion of India's government bonds in the government bond index, the World Government Bond Index, that will also bring in a huge supply of money, which can also enable borrowing. So I think those are sources that can be tapped into to actually fund the necessary fiscal expansion.
So you're saying we may just escape the tax wrath of the finance minister, because our viewers are from a category where they'll be looking at that announcement very, very closely. Are you saying we might just escape higher tax rates in the budget being announced on Monday?
I've already said what I had to say, Navika.
Subramaniam Saab, you can. It doesn't cost too much to allay the anticipation and the kind of stress that people are going through over this weekend, because the budget is on a Monday. As they say, tax rate increasing, the imminence of that is like the तीसरी आंख of Shivji, which people are waiting for. तो अगर आप कोई अच्छा शब्द कह दें तो शायद व्यूअर्स का वीकेंड बेटर हो जाएगा.
लेकिन एक मर्यादा भी है जिसे मुझे एक्चुअली निभाना है. So I have to actually I have to be cognizant of that.
So you're saying there is a possibility that funds can be available from other sources rather than increasing tax rates. That's something that we'll be waiting for extremely happily and possibly, as they say, कि बहुत आशीर्वाद मिलेगा आपको. लेकिन मैं एक आखिरी सवाल आपसे पूछना चाह रही हूँ, और ये सवाल इसलिए पूछ रही हूँ क्योंकि आप सुब्रमण्यम जी हैं लेकिन हिंदी बहुत अच्छी बोलते हैं, तो कुछ हिंदी में आपसे पूछना चाहती हूँ कि आम आदमी इस वक्त डिमांड साइड की भी सोच रहा है, और डिमांड साइड की सोचने के लिए टू पुश द इकोनॉमी एंड टू इंक्रीज द वेलोसिटी ऑफ मनी दैट इज एक्सचेंजिंग, यू नीड द डिमांड साइड impetus that should be given. Do you think there is a possibility in a tough year like this, if to give a impetus on the demand side and give some money in the hands of people?
हाँ ज़रूर. एक्चुअली यदि इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर में खूब खर्च होती है तो उससे कंस्ट्रक्शन सेक्टर में काफ़ी जो गतिविधियां हैं वो बढ़ती हैं, और कंस्ट्रक्शन सेक्टर में जो गतिविधियां उनके बढ़ने से काफ़ी जो आपका इनफॉर्मल सेक्टर होता है उसमें काफ़ी लाभ आता है, और जो जॉब्स हैं इनफॉर्मल सेक्टर के जो की रोज़गार है उसमें भी बढ़ोतरी होती है। तो इन सब के चलते लोगों के हाथ में पैसा आता है, तो इसीलिए इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर में जो ज़ोर दिया जा रहा है वो एक अहम कदम है। इसके अलावा आपको ध्यान होगा कि आत्मनिर्भर भारत 3 में जो वेज सब्सिडी का जो प्रोग्राम का अमल किया गया था, उससे भी जो फॉर्मल सेक्टर है उसमें जॉब्स बनने की काफ़ी गुंजाइश है, 3 साल के लिए दिया गया है वो। तो इन सब के चलते डिमांड में अच्छी एक वृद्धि आ सकती है। एक और बहुत अहम मुद्दा इसमें है कि वैक्सीनेशन का। तो जैसे ही लोग वैक्सीनेट होंगे और उसके चलते जो डर है कॉन्टैक्ट सेंसिटिव सेक्टर्स का, जैसे कोविड के पहले हम लोग शायद ब्यूटी पार्लर कुछ लोग जाते थे या मसाज के लिए जाते थे, ऐसे कॉन्टैक्ट सेंसिटिव सेक्टर जिनमें मंदी आई है वो अब अच्छे से तरीके से वापस आ सकते हैं। तो जिनसे और जो लोग इनमें काम करते हैं उनके हाथों में भी पैसा आएगा। तो इन सब को मिलजुल के आप देखें तो काफ़ी डिमांड में भी अच्छी एक पेस आ सकती है। पिछले कुछ महीनों में काफ़ी इसमें अच्छा एक प्रोग्रेस आया है, और इसमें आगे चल के भी मेरा एक विश्वास है कि ज़रूर आएगा इसमें।
आपने एम्प्लॉयमेंट की बात की, बट वी आर लुकिंग एट द अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट रेट्स, दे आर एट अबाउट 9.1% एज पर CMI डेटा. Do you think that is a worrying number, and do you think we are going to see any lessening of the unemployment rates in the short term?
I think as demand picks up and as the economic recovery proceeds ahead, the impact on the unemployment rate will certainly be there. And as I was mentioning earlier as well, the programs that have been catered towards employment, the wage subsidy program, focus on infrastructure and the construction sector, all of which actually will help to bring informal sector jobs, I think will certainly help, especially in some of the contact sensitive sectors where employment has been significantly impacted because of the pandemic. The vaccination drive will also help in bringing back employment in those sectors, because the demand there can actually come back with a vengeance, because there are a lot of households that are actually looking to resume normal life once they get vaccinated. So together with all these, especially the fact that the 11% growth rate that is anticipated, because a high tide actually lifts all boats, and that will have a salutary impact on employment.
My last question to you, Mr. Subramaniam, is just one. The finance minister herself has set the bar very high when she's made a statement that this will be a once in a 100-year budget. Do you think she's going to live up to that promise that she's made to the people of India? And what are the 3 big things that we should be looking forward to in the budget?
I certainly hope so, that ma'am will indeed deliver a good budget. In terms of the expectations, I would say 3 things. First, infrastructure spending, especially accelerating the national infrastructure pipeline. Healthcare spending focused on the vaccination drive, and third, financial sector. Those are my 3 top priorities.
All right, we'll wait and watch for the budget. Just 24 hours away, but thank you very much, Mr. Subramaniam, for joining me on Frankly Speaking and speaking frankly on what we should be looking forward to in the budget.